Hi, everybody. This is episode 83 of our podcast, Artificial Intelligence and Cybersurgery. This is the official podcast for our journal, Artificial Intelligence Surgery. My name's Andrew Gums. I'm here today with Dr. Arun Rai, who currently works at Johns Hopkins as a urologist. I'm very excited to learn more about him and talk to him. But I will let my co-host, Dr. Vincent Grasso, start us off.
That's great. Hey, Arun, thanks for joining a podcast on a Saturday. Are you are
Yeah.
you in Maryland now? You're down at Hopkins?
Yes. Yeah. Here in Baltimore.
Where are you
Well,
from originally?
From New York. That's why I was curious where Vincent's from. I'm from upstate, Albany area. I was in practice actually with Northwell Health for a number of years before moving down here and being recruited to Hopkins.
Oh, nice. Where did you do your like medical school and training and stuff like that?
Medical school and undergrad, I did a combined 7-year program in Boston at the BU School of Medicine, and then I did my urology training at the Scott Department of Urology at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, and the Texas Medical Center. And then did my fellowship with Dr. Louis Cavusi and Dr. Arthur Smith, Dr. Lee Richstone, a number of other folks in New York, and then stayed on there and at Northwell for practice. And then recently joined the faculty here last year here at Hopkins.
So I could never resist. That's why I kind of started asking questions. Where are you from? Where are your origins, as we would say here in
Oh
France?
yeah, yeah. No, Indian. My parents are Indian immigrants. My mother is a pediatrician. She is in practice, although she slowed down a bit in Atlanta. My sister, also a physician, is here at the NIH. She's a pediatric hepatologist, and my brother-in-law is an ENT. My wife is the only non-physician, and she is an attorney.
Well, that's a power couple for
Yeah.
sure. Can
sure.
you give us any insights? It sounds like the NIH, it almost sounds like a bomb went off. How are things going over there?
Yeah, my sister is, I mean, I think it was a little bit of touch and go initially once a lot of the administration changed. Fortunately for her, she is probably the only pediatric gastroenterologist or hepatology focused gastroenterologist there doing basic science research and seeing some of the patients she's seeing. So, um, in her own words, I believe there's some degree of job security, but I think there were a lot of staff that, either had, other positions where unfortunately they were either asked to leave or step down or so on and so forth. So I think for a time there, she was unclear maybe about how things were going to end up, but fortunately for her, things have worked out. And so we're all really thankful for that.
Oh, that's cool. Why urology? You have a lot of variety in your family. What drew you to urology?
Yeah, no, good question. I think to me, I think it was the interest of kind of a variety of technologies, and also just kind of the surgical breadth. We do everything from open to laparoscopic to robotic to microscopic to kind of big open wax. To me, I think the people also are a big attraction. They tell, who do you want to sit with at the proverbial lunch table? And these were just the people that I got along with the most. Good sense of humor, obviously
Yeah.
valued
Happy
there.
happy surgeons,
Yeah,
unlike
happy
a lot of
surgeons.
other types of
Yeah,
surgeons. Yeah, for sure.
yeah. And I think the other part was that there was always an interest. I mean, yes, technology is cool and fascinating, but there always seemed to be one common thread is that everybody was interested in kind of pushing the needle. In fact, one of the things that the AUA, the American Urologic Association, I sit on the committee for new technology and telehealth, which is really their AI focused governance committee. So we're issuing a statement now and preparing a white paper on the use of AI in clinical practice for urology. We just completed our advocacy day on the Capitol Hill, advocating for the use of or in the proper use of AI and how to kind of think about that for healthcare. And so it's funny, the AMA, as of right now, is looking to issue a statement, is actually looking to us, a relatively small specialty, to think about how do we craft and think about that statement.
If I remember correctly, and this might be an old wives' tale, but there's one general surgeon who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine. It was, oh my goodness, Theodore Kocher for
Yeah.
thyroid surgery. When he was at Switzerland, I believe, at Bern, at the Inselspital. But urology, I think, I may be incorrect, has multiple people in the field of urology have won the Peace Prize or no, Nobel Prize for medicine, because there's a lot of innovation in urology in particular. I don't know if there's a bias, because now I'm remembering, I believe somebody won the Nobel Prize for medicine for nitrous oxide, which
Ah,
obviously they weren't, obviously I don't think they were urologists, but let's just say some people have a lot of things. They're fixated on a few areas of the human body, but I digress. So your interest in so that's one of the reasons why I almost became a
yeah.
urologist. Is what I'm trying to get at, is it's like they were always a step ahead, and I have so many questions for you, because from remote surgery, where it's like a perfect fit for urology, where it's like not a good fit in liver and
Yeah.
pancreatic surgery because of the risk of bleeding. I want to get into that in a minute, but before we get into that, how did you get into AI? What was your entrance into it? You've already
Yeah.
always been interested in technology, but how did you
Right.
get into AI?
Yeah, no, well, it's funny. I started my first company while being a physician, actually in residency training, and it had to do with how do we do a better job of aligning physician expertise with medical device companies, or those just looking for physicians that or to weigh in on a technology. And I realized this because I'd patented with some partners two devices as a resident, and I was in the process of trying to get these commercialized. And it just was striking to me that the folks I was talking to from these big strategics oftentimes are maybe just ill-fitting to being able to understand the problem that we were solving. And it kind of like set off a light bulb in my brain. I'm thinking like, these companies should have exactly very specific understanding of like what kind of surgeons does what kind of things. And then this ballooned. So I ended up doing my MBA at Cornell. And during the time I was like evaluating the process, I was like finishing fellowship and starting practice. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, wait, not only the strategics have this problem, but healthcare systems have this problem. They really struggle with understanding how even the right patient ends up seeing the right provider. And to me, that would set off another light bulb. And I'm thinking to myself, how is this process done today? And the process that's done today is that, when you started a new practice, you fill out a piece of paper with all the conditions you're willing to see. But then somebody non-clinical is the person who's responsible for making arguably the most important decision about a patient's journey clinically into the patient's into their kind of foray into healthcare or into that health system. And that in and of itself is kind of just fascinating, because I was like, wait, there's a huge data gap where there's all this data exists about how I practice medicine and how my partners practice medicine, and being able to get them into to see the right provider. And so I was thinking, I was like, what is the best way for this to make sense? And of course, at this time, AI was just starting to pick up steam and starting to become more of a thing that we would talk about. And as that was happening, I was thinking of like, can we think about AI models that does this matching process, right? That takes into account maybe 20 or 30 pieces of information about a given provider or a patient, and being able to kind of make that match. So as that kind of gathered steam, we start to kind of like look at AI modeling, and then thinking about like, how do we use AI not only for the care, outside of the hospital, but I was like, well, if this is what's doing for my patients to get in to see a provider, what am I doing, as it became part of my surgical experience and even post-operatively. So that's kind of what started the journey. And actually, that was one of the reasons I got recruited to Hopkins, was now the newly created Division of Quantitative Data Sciences at the Brady Urological Institute was just getting established in the end of 2024, and they started looking for folks to kind of lead that division up. And then luckily enough, I ended up being recruited for that position. And so I now serve in three different kind of buckets. I see AI helping us with how do we get the right patients to the right provider and the care they need in a timely fashion? How do we use AI to help us be better surgeons in the OR? And then how do we use AI after the patient's left our office so that we can learn from our patient that we had that experience with, so that the next time that patient comes in, or a patient that looks just like that, how do we then, set them up for success going forward? And so that's kind of the three verticals that I've been kind of working in now. I have a couple grants kind of in that space, thinking about kind of how do we set that up.
So Vincent's kind of, I know he's salivating when he's listening to you talk, because you guys speak the same language. Vincent's wheelhouse is communicomics. He's very interested in how AI can help with the patient journey. So Vincent, from what you're hearing, What are you thinking here?
Well, this is music to my ears, as you said, because you and I, we're proponents of leveraging AI within the pre, the intra, and the post-operative experience. And we're all well-trained surgeons. You guys are stellar trained. The best surgeons in the world live in an operating room, and they work their magic. But if you can optimize the patient before they arrive in the OR, and then 90 days post-operatively, you can work some magic. You have a global better outcome. And the surgeon outside the operating room, unless they have these extra skill sets and platforms to use, they can't really bring much value upstream or downstream.
Right.
So that's why this is so exciting. We're actually, Andrew and I are co-authoring a book chapter on hepatobiliary surgery, and the focus of the chapter is enhancing the patient journey preoperatively and postoperatively, so that you have this whole holistic pre, intra, and post, workspace, right? The ecosystem. So that's all. It's so exciting. And the focus I'm working on is how can we enhance clinical communication precisely in a bespoke manner, where every patient actually is a unique individual, and you have to adjust linguistically, right? How you approach them. So I would love to have a conversation offline as well about how we can, collaborate together with the three of us on some of these projects, right, Andrew?
Yeah, no, definitely. You mentioned that you're working with remote surgery. Vincent and I wrote a chapter on that, and the reality is not all surgery is created equal. Like LASIK surgery, basically, you make a little incision, then the machine does the actual procedure, and then the ophthalmologist then puts throws the cornea over and finishes the procedure. And that's really, a high level of autonomy for a surgery. Neurosurgeons, similar thing. They get the access, but then the device will actually like look and treat areas of epilepsy. Then you get to urology, which again, I think I just saw a report in England, from England, mainland England to Gibraltar. They just did a prostatectomy. And it's such a good setting. A prostatectomy is perfect, because correct me if I'm wrong, Aaron, but there's not that much risk of bleeding. It's really, the worst thing you can do during a prostatectomy is cut the ureters, right? And that's part of the operation. I mean, I say that obviously as a joke, and that's obviously an oversimplification. But when you're doing a Whipple procedure, removal of the head of the pancreas, or you're doing a major hepatectomy, the risk of bleeding is so great that I'm sure people will do these operations, major hepatectomies and resection of the head of the pancreas, remotely. But the question is should we?
Yeah.
So like, how do you view it as a urologist? Because you guys, again, your genius of going into urology, the technology is like kind of perfect for the diseases that you treat. That said, you obviously have bleeding with, when you do a nephrectomy, but again, you have a bailout, you can just do a nephrectomy. So how do you guys talk about this, how it's different, like for vascular surgery or for cardiac surgery, remote surgery? Yeah.
No,
What's your thoughts on that?
it's a very good point. I think currently at the SRS, so I moderated a panel last year at Strasbourg SRS, which is in Europe, talking about what is the future of telesurgery. And not surprisingly, some companies, I don't know if you're familiar with Savado. Savado has been kind of very much at the front and center of this. They have received some key investment from VC groups that are fueled by physicians. They've received some strategic funding from Intuitive. They've also now have some NVIDIA collaborations that are occurring. So they're very much enabling robotic end effectors. I think they're kind of like the network company. And to them, it's not about, oh, we want to do prostatectomy over nephrectomy or over hepatectomy. They're looking at it as like a playing field. And they're like, anybody who wants to pay to play, we want to be able to solve that problem. To your point, I do think there's going to be an adoption curve, right? As we kind of think about risk. I am, acutely aware that not only was that operation there, but there's also the famous kind of Lindbergh operation. And this year at SRS, Vip Patel from Florida did a case between Orlando and Africa. But even though that's been kind of touted as news, China's been doing this for years, right? With their Chinese, robots doing kind of telesurgery from all different parts of China. And I think that the unfortunate truth, and I'm sure this is not, I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but we're facing a national physician shortage here in the US. I think there's a global physician shortage as we now have an aging patient population with increasingly complex disease. We're not replacing the number of physicians. And so if the answer is we have to do a better job of folks like Andrew and Vincent doing really complicated surgeries, and it's better use of your time to be doing that, but you can't be in everywhere at once. I think telesurgery ends up being a very natural platform for that. I do know that, at Northwell Health, the team with Frank Cascio and actually Louis Cavusi, who's now the system director of telesurgery, they have now expanded into Connecticut and to Jersey and northern parts of New York, outside of just the Long Island area. And for them alone, right, that's an example of, we're not even talking about international. Even within the health system, they're trying to implement a telesurgical practice where folks in like northern Connecticut can get a prostatectomy taken out by a surgeon in Long Island. And so there seems to be marching in that direction. To your point, maybe the answer is we start with prostate, kidney, and we eventually start moving towards more complicated procedures like Whipples and hepatectomies. I do think that there's a lot of work that has to be done. I know the FDA has been working with the SRS to start thinking about what are the laws and regulations? Like, do we need to have a credentialed physician on site to be able to bedside? Does there need to be someone, are there tiers of cases, to your point, where a prostatectomy may be a lower tier case, so you just need to have someone within a 5 mile radius, or someone like a hepatectomy, you need to have a licensed surgeon who's capable of doing that in the room, right?
Yeah.
And that I think this is all ripe for discussion. I think you're asking all the right questions, and I think we certainly need to have that conversation with the right regulatory bodies and physician bodies to be able to think about how do we do this safely in the correct way.
I was actually on a panel and on this topic, and I got myself into a little bit of trouble. Some of the business people didn't like some of my comments on this topic because honestly, I was thinking in a silo. I was thinking major hepatectomy, Whipple procedure, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? But then, there are many different types of surgeries.
Right.
There are many safe types of surgery, and actually remote surgery, telesurgery could be fantastic. This guy in Gibraltar, he sounded so happy. He didn't have to fly to England. He didn't have to wait. He got his surgery done, and that's fantastic. But, you're from, I don't even know. I would normally say, I would have said years ago that your parents or your origins are from the developing world. I've been to India many times recently. I'm not so sure that's true. As you know, India is incredibly advanced now over the last, 30 years. It's shocking. That said, what about the ethics of
Yeah.
focusing money on having doctors in the quote unquote developed world
Yeah.
treating people in, the developing world? Like, why shouldn't we as a world community, why shouldn't we, train those people how to do surgery on site? Why shouldn't that be our focus?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So there is an Indian robotics company that has maybe taken a slightly different approach to this. And so what they've done is that
SSI
yeah,
Innovations. Yeah.
SSI Innovations, right? And so they're actually using kind of mobile surgery trucks, right? And so they're bringing almost the surgeon and the surgical team to you in these mobile ORs. So there is that, which is maybe a little bit of a different answer to your question. Like, I think they're trying to answer the question that you're trying to solve, is like, well, we have the talent here locally. It's just a matter of these kind of maybe lower income folks not getting the access because they don't live near these cities. But to your point, it's this is maybe more of a capitalistic view, right? If you have the money to pay for it and you just don't have the means or the schedule to travel, but you want somebody from, the Mayo Clinic or, from New York City to do your surgery. I mean, hypothetically, if you're willing to pay for it, I mean, there's no reason you can't. I mean, and folks like Savado and Intuitive, this is exactly what they want, right? They want to be able to open the market size to be able to say, we can treat anybody anywhere.
No, I get it. I get it. I mean, the expression money, what is it? Money talks. No, money talks and bullshit walks. Like, I get it. But, we've kind of been living in a world where the dollar is the only thing that matters, or the euro, or the yen, or and like the world we're in right now, I'm not sure is the ideal world that we want or need to. I'm not sure it's sustainable, is all I'm getting at. So it just
Mhm.
it's just it worries me. It worries me. And we're actually doing like a survey kind of on the ethical economics of surgical technology and robotics. Are you a member of Aons? Do you know what Aons is?
No.
Okay, so the journal Artificial Intelligence Surgery, which is like I'm just going to say our catchphrase because I like to say it in the beginning of the podcast, but I forgot to say it. It's the first and maybe only journal dedicated exclusively to AI and surgery. So then we
Yep.
created a society called Art Aeons, which is like, from the Greek word for eons or eternity, stands for Artificial Intelligence Organization for the Next Generation of Surgeons. We would love to have you as a member. And I
Yeah,
just sent out AIONS.ai. I'll send it to you.
sure.
Because we sent out a survey that talks about a lot of these issues. Like, for instance, if you do a robotic surgery
Mhm.
and you have a complication and you need to reoperate on the patient, do you do it laparoscopically, open, robotically? Like, and
Yeah.
and if you do it laparoscopically or open and not robotically, you know, isn't there a disconnect? These are just at least issues we have to discuss and think
Yeah.
about. Is all I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm laughing because this happened to me last night. So I for the first time in my life, I did a renal artery aneurysm resection. I mean, that's not something I normally do. The vascular surgeon and I decided to do, we're saying, well, let's try to see if we can do this robotically.
Yeah.
And actually, the aneurysm part went fine. We stayed robotic, resected this thing. Was fine for like 48 hours, went home, came back in with kind of sudden abdominal pain. And he had some kind of like hemoperitoneum. Ended up taking him back to the operating room. I found this really small mesenteric arterial vessel that, I'm thinking to myself, and I was like, if had I opened, right, or done this laparoscopically, I may have not seen it, right, because I was just kind of recreating the same views that I had, remove all this clot. And I'm not a unique in this. I've had a couple of colleagues that I've talked to where they've XLAP'd a GU case that they did robotically initially, haven't seen anything. And then, I had one partner who had to go back in robotically and then found this tiny little bleeding vessel from the node packet that he had taken out. And he was like, would have never seen this open. So to your point, it's a great question. It's like if you're taking someone back, like, should you just be doing it open? But then it's also like, do you have the same visualization? And, I don't know. I certainly think it's expensive for sure. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that I definitely cost the health system more money to go back in robotically than open for sure. But in the flip side, I'm like, would I have
The
seen that?
guy went
No.
home right away,
Yeah.
problem solved. So that's yeah. So anyway, these are the type of things that we
Yeah.
kind of want to answer because we need to think about. Like, trust me, I get it. Like, I work with industry. We need money for innovation. And like, if the investor and the shareholders don't get money back, they can't give you more money to do research. We
Yeah.
don't live in a perfect world where, money doesn't exist. Money exists. It's just I like to think about, the way we should do it. And it's very different. So Vincent,
Yeah.
what do you think about what we're saying here?
No, I like this. I've always been interested in trying to stratify a surgical. You have 100 surgeries that need to be performed, and you can rank them from complex to simple. In the old days, family practice guys did like 1 year of general surgery, and they could do cysts, they could do simple appendectomy,
Gallbladders. They could do gallbladders and hernias.
do
Yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
they don't do it anymore,
Yeah.
but they could. And so that's a whole workforce that kind of has been sidelined, right? And I know family practice folks that they would love to do one extra year so they could be more involved with their patient care. That's good care.
Yeah.
Should the more complex procedures be reserved for people with the specialized training? Stratify it all out. One thing that's good though is technically, as we move to 6G, we lose all the problems with latency and bandwidth and all that stuff. So once you break that barrier, now that's not an issue, latency anymore, and big files move around. So that's technically good. We have all the technical accoutrements ready to go, but at the end of the day, it's still tricky, right?
Yeah, I actually have a question for you guys. So, I mean, so recently Hopkins put together this video where one of my collaborators, Axel Krieger, removed or like took a hydrogel model, autonomously cut out a tumor. It's actually made some headlines. Cut out a tumor from a kidney. Actually, they were disturbing the robot, and I was able to kind of suture on its own autonomously. And a lot of surgeons started thinking about, oh my God, my job is, at risk.
Yeah.
And I think on the other hand, on the flip side, Vincent, to your earlier point where you were talking about like we have to start thinking about care before and after surgery. To me, those things, the before and after care of surgery, are just far lower hanging fruit than changing or taking away kind of like complex maneuvers during a surgery. Even the LASIK, even though it may be relatively simple on the scale of surgery compared to like a hepatectomy or even a prostatectomy, I think that we're still a far away from that. So my question to you guys is, in terms of what is going to be modernized first by AI, I'd be curious to hear your guys. Like, you guys have been talking to a lot of different folks. I've seen your guys' podcasts. Who do you like? What roles or spaces within perioperative care before, during, and after do you think is going to be changed first?
I'm gonna jump in here because there's one thing that blew my mind probably more than anything. It was this woman in China, this elderly woman in China. She was having a hard time getting in contact with her doctor. She had to drive like an hour, 45 minutes or an hour, and then wait for hours, and then she would get to talk to the doctor for like 5 minutes, and then he would send her back. And she was explaining to her I think her son, who was like a journalist for The Guardian or whatever. She's like, actually, I find I like large language models because I can ask it all the questions I want. It takes all the time. It doesn't get frustrated, explains everything to me. And the doctor is like, he's robotic. He has no time to deal with me. So, technology, I love technology. Like I love it. And if there's a robot that can do something better than I can, I would love that. I'm on call right now. I've got a cold. I've got like bronchitis. I feel terrible. If there was a robot right now, if an appendix comes at 2 a.m. and the robot could do the appendix, I'm all for it, I just like you say, I want more time to optimize my patient before surgery, get their nutrition better, do better surveillance on them post-operatively. Maybe pick up their cancer before it becomes stage 4. So there's I am just not afraid. Perhaps I should be, but what about you, Vincent?
No, the lowest hanging fruit is the before and the after. The before and the after doesn't require, amazing widgets and gadgets that required FDA approval. It's a lot to do with education, communication, and risk mitigation. So if the variables up front are kind of figured out a little better, you do a lot of predictive things of what could go wrong. You can allocate resources better, right? The health systems lose money because one of the reasons is that they do damage control post-operatively. Nothing really was modeled as to what things could go wrong and how to allocate resources for it preemptively, right? There is no real quality risk stratification that's happening globally in a health system. So that's all data driven. That's not widget driven. So that's, I think, the battle space. But Andrew, I think you will agree. Within 20 years, there's probably going to be a robot that can perform surgery better than any human, right? So that,
well, I always like, there's a book called Deep Blue, I believe. No, oh my goodness. Anyway, it was written by Gary Kasparov, the one who Deep Mind. I can't remember the name of the book now. Great book. I highly recommend it. The first grandmaster who lost to a computer, and it talks about the whole process, and it's fascinating, well written. I can't recommend it high enough. I think if you want to understand where we're headed. And he basically sums up at the end of the book, if you put a man against a computer, the computer's going to win. If you put up a computer against a computer, nobody wins, right? They'll cancel each other out. But if you put a man and a computer versus a computer, the combination of a man and a computer will beat the computer. And so for me, that is, the holy grail. I want as much assistance as I can I
Sure.
want to be able to remove tumors that I can't remove right now. I want to push, the limits of surgery further. And that's what excites me about autonomous surgery. We're obviously talking about pre and post-op, but as far as in the operating room, I want to know the patient with 3 metastases from pancreatic cancer. You should resect this person because they're going to have a good biology. On the flip side, this other person, has a bad biology. You shouldn't do the surgery. You should call it a day. I want as much help as I can. So, maybe I'm naive, but I think maybe I've watched too much Star Trek, but that's definitely what excites me. What about you, Arun? What are your thoughts on it?
No, I agree. I mean, I think we're surgeons who are fools for those who do not believe that their patients are putting all their conditions into ChatGPT before coming to see them. Every patient is. Every patient's putting their MRI report and saying, explain this to me in plain English,
Oh yeah.
asking about my MRI, asking about my pathology, about my options. We're running a study right now looking at what the quality of those reports are versus what is the agreement between the plan generated by an LLM versus that of a physician, because as of right now, we believe that the physician is the gold standard. We all know, especially those of us who are experimenting with AI, that though the AI LLM plan, as long as it's fed the same information, are going to be more comprehensive, more in depth than maybe what's denoted in a note by a surgeon. Just pure time, right? That's just what it is. And so to me, I think that if we believe that fundamentally that how patients are finding medical care is changing with the use of LLMs, I think the way that patients generally currently get to a provider today is going to become extinct. And so healthcare systems nationally and internationally have to think about, to Vincent's point, how do we get care to patients in their syntax and their comprehension on their time differently than you calling a phone number between the hours of 9 and 5 to finding a physician that's going to only spend 5 minutes with you. And so care navigation, I think, is going to be the first wave of what's going to be modernized. I mean, if we think about physician shortages and healthcare consolidation, especially here in the US, and kind of the advent of these larger and larger healthcare systems, which have multi-state or multi-district with 30, 40, 50, 80 physicians, care coordination is going to be increasingly complex. And I think it's going to be a zero-sum game, right? The ones that do it well are going to walk away with surgical volume and the experience, and the ones that do poorly are not going to do well with this. And so I think that's going to be a battle that we'll see kind of early on going into the next, at least 5 to 10 years.
So I can't think of a better place to stop. Why don't we stop now, Vincent, close us out, and then we'll talk for the last 5 minutes offline, okay?
Sure. So we're closing episode 83 of the AI and Cybersurgery Podcast. Thank you, Arun Rai, urologist and AI researcher at Hopkins. And we look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.